Hi, my name is Sean Bodley with IBM. I'm part of the Advanced Technical Skills team located in Dallas, Texas, and I'm about to present an overview and demonstration of how to perform a rolling migration to PowerHA version 7. Now, if you have any questions about this presentation or any other presentation or demonstration that has my name on it, feel free to send me an email at sbodley@us.ibm.com. First, let me give an overview of the test cluster that I have configured to perform the rolling migration on. I have PowerHA version 6.1 SP7 with AIX 6.1 TL5 SP7. That's about as high as you can get without having a cluster-aware version of AIX. I have a simple 2-node cluster configured for hot standby with a single service IP address, a single data volume group, and a test application server. Below is my cluster topology. I do actually have 2 IP networks and a single non-IP network. And I'm also going to show you what's different after the migration. First, let me give an overview of the steps required to actually perform a rolling migration to version 7. Now, these steps actually assume you are not already running a CAA-capable version of AIX. So this includes upgrading AIX. First, stop the cluster on any particular node. Typically, in a hot standby configuration, you do it on the standby node first. However, if you are stopping it on a cluster node that's hosting resources, you will probably want to move the resources over to another node. After the services stop completely on that node, go ahead and upgrade AIX to 6.1.6 or above. After performing the upgrade, you'll also need to explicitly install the CA Filesets of boss.cluster and boss.aha.fs. And actually, if you choose boss.cluster, it should automatically prereq the AHA.fs as well, but it's just a good idea to go ahead and just choose to install both of them, as the demonstration will show. After this is upgraded and those file sets are installed, you will perform a reboot on the system. After it starts back up, you need to modify the config file of etc cluster rhost. That is the rhost file that CAA specifically uses. And what you put in that file is the cluster host name IP addresses. It's only one address per line. You do not put in the boot or service addresses. It's the IP address that resolves to each host name of each node in the cluster, and that is it. After updating that file, you refresh the communications daemon of CLcomdey. This truly is only CLcomdey, which is the CAA specific version of the communications daemon, and not CLcomdey ES that we historically have used with PowerHA and HACMP. After refreshing it, you will actually execute this new command option, which is specific for upgrading, is this CLmakecheck. Now, you can actually run this anytime you want, and ideally you've already run through this in a test environment before you ever perform this in prod. However, during a normal scheduled upgrade, this is where you would normally run the CLmakecheck. What this does is it performs a HAODM check to make sure that your cluster configuration is valid to be upgraded to version 7.1. And I will actually show this in the demo, the menu screens that it provides. What happens is it checks the ODM. If you don't get any errors, it essentially tells you you can proceed. And then there is an option 2, which option 2 is for a snapshot upgrade specifically, which we're not covering here. And then option 3 is specifically used to specify which disk you want to use as a cluster repository disk. That is a new requirement in PowerHA version 7 specifically because of the cluster-aware AIX. I suspect that it will be common that you can reuse your previously existing disk heartbeat for a repository disk as long as that disk currently does not have a volume group on it. In version 7.1 and above, regular disk heartbeat no longer applies, which I'm going to show in the topology before and after the upgrade. After performing the CLmakecheck and you get no errors and you fill out what you want your repository disk and or you can specify a multicast address or HA will choose one for you, then you proceed to go ahead and perform a update all to upgrade to the latest version of PowerHA. You restart cluster services, it rejoins back into the cluster, and at this point you actually have a mixed cluster. You'll have a node that's on the old version, in our case it'll be 6.1, and the new version 7.1. It is completely supported to have a mixed environment, as it's understood during a migration you would have exactly a mixed version. The important things to know is do not make any cluster changes while running mixed versions. Do not perform any operations other than moving a resource group back and forth through CSPOC, and do not perform a sync and verify. So after it rejoins the cluster, if we previously moved the resource group, let's move it back, and then we repeat all these steps one at a time for each node in the cluster from start to finish. Now, for every additional node in the cluster, when you run CLmakecheck, you will no longer get the menu options after it's been run the first time. The reason for that is there is a very specific file that gets created called clmigcheck.txt, and I will actually show this in the demonstration. Once that file exists on each node in the cluster, it knows that the CLmakecheck operation has already been performed and you do not need to run it again. So now let me give an overview of what our cluster looks like after the migration. We're going to be at 7.10 SP4. We're going to have AIX 616 SP6, including the CAA specific file sets. My resource group configuration is exactly the same. However, what is different here is that my disk heartbeats are gone. The disk heartbeat network will automatically be removed from the configuration when the migration completes. And we will actually see that CLmakecheck will give us a warning saying that disk heartbeat is not supported. However, it will automatically remove it for you. Okay, and before I actually proceed to the demonstration, just a couple of quick references. How to migrate to version 7 is covered in the PowerHA 7.1 Red Book. There's a chapter specifically dedicated to the process. Migrating to version 7.1 or 7.11 from 6.1 is exactly the same as far as the steps are concerned. There are a couple of CAA differences between the versions, but it doesn't change any of the process. There is also a PowerHA version 7.1 workshop that our learning services folks have put together. And then you can also follow me on Twitter as PowerHA Guy. Now, following me is not going to add any significant amount of traffic to your feeds. I maybe tweet once a week, and it's usually just updated support information for PowerHA specifically. Okay. Now I'm ready to actually perform the rolling migration. Now I call this a SemiLive demo because I've already performed the steps. I've just broken it down into 7 pre-recorded sections in an effort to be time efficient. Recording an hour plus upgrade of AIX I figure is a waste of time, so I'm going to show each step and then continue where the previous step left off in the next recording. So let's go ahead and get started here. So you can see I have 6100 SP5. I have the cluster up and running on both nodes. The cluster is stable. The tool that you're seeing at the top is called QHA. It is not CLstat. So download QHA and use that instead. You can see that my topology information and my resource group information is exactly what I stated in the presentation. So now all I'm doing here is I'm going to stop the standby node Jessica in an effort to get ready to upgrade it. So you can see at the top that Jessica is leaving the cluster while the CL stop is performing. Once you see ST init, that tells you it is no longer in the cluster. So now I'm about to perform the AIX update to upgrade to a CAA capable version of AIX. And this will take a second. I'm just going to scoot ahead a few seconds in time. I promise you're not missing anything. You're welcome to watch the time indicator at the above. We started this whole process about 2020. And so now the AIX upgrade is started. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this one and switch over to the next step, which is the AIX upgrade has completed. And even though I've upgraded AIX, I still have to specifically install the CAA capable file sets. So I'm proving here that they indeed do not get installed just by performing an upgrade because they didn't exist before. So doing a update all will not automatically install them. So now I'm just going to choose off the pick list of boss.ahafs as soon as it pops up. There we go. So I'll now do a search on boss.ahafs and then select it, and then I will choose boss.cluster and select it. And now I'm going to perform the install. Now this install actually took just about a minute for it to install, but I'm going to go ahead and advance in time. You can still see the screen, but I'm just going to scoot up a few seconds to speed the demo along. So now the install, let me back up just a little bit, the install completed. And now I've upgraded to a CAA capable version of AIX. And I have the required CAA file sets installed, so I can verify through OS level that I do have 61TL6 SP6 installed. And once that is verified, I can now go ahead and reboot the cluster. Okay, so that's rebooting. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the next step, which is after the node has rebooted, I log back in. I now check to see that the new communications daemon is now active. I now need to edit my Etsy cluster rhost to put in the IP addresses of my two nodes host name IPs. There we go. Now I refresh CLcomdey, and now I'm ready to actually run the CLmakecheck. So CLmakecheck, I'm going to pause this for just a second. You can see the three menu options: check ODM, check snapshot, and enter repository disk and multicast address. For a rolling migration, you only need to check the ODM, so I'm going to choose option 1, and it actually comes back very quickly and says, hey, you have a disk heartbeat configured. That's actually considered quite normal to have a disk heartbeat configured, and since it is only a warning, we really can go ahead and continue because, as I stated before, it will remove the disk heartbeat network for us. So we'll go ahead and choose enter and tell it to continue, and it tells me there's no unsupported elements. So now I go back to the main menu. This time I'm now going to choose option 3 so I can specify the repository disk I want to use. Now this takes a second. It will actually do a discovery on the nodes to find any shared disks that are currently not part of a volume group. So you can see it gave me a pick list here to choose from, and I'm going to choose the last disk on here of HDisk 5. And then here it says you can specify a multicast address if you choose to. Now it's not required that you choose one. However, if you do not choose one, HA will create one for you. What HA will do is it will use the last 3 octets of the host IP address and substitute the first octet to be a multicast address range. So in most cases, you probably don't need to choose your own, but you're certainly capable of doing that. So I'm going to let it just pick one for me once we create the cluster later. So now I'm done with CLmigcheck, and as I stated before, once you run option 3, it creates a clmigcheck.txt file. This actually gets pushed out to each node in the cluster. And the only thing it contains is the type of cluster, the PVID of the repository disk, and then if you had actually specified a multicast address or not, which in our case we didn't. So now we're actually ready to upgrade to PowerHA version 7. In this demo, it's going to be 7.10 SP4, but as I stated before, if you were upgrading to version 7.11, this process is exactly the same. So now I'm about to perform the HA update, and always be sure to accept new licenses, and then always be sure you perform this process in a test environment before you ever execute it in prod. So you can see now that my upgrade has started. I'm going to stop this recording and switch over to the next one, which is after the HA 7.1 update has completed. So I got the OK there. All my file sets are updated. Now all I need to do is rejoin this node back into the cluster. So I simply do a CL start, choosing all the defaults. Now this will take a minute for it to actually come back up, and you can also see on the message on here that it knows that it's running different levels of HA across the cluster. In that case, it will not perform a cluster verification. Just like I said, that's one of the things you do not want to do in a mixed cluster environment. So we get the OK back very quickly, and you can see at the top in our cluster status that the node is joining. And now I'm just going to swap the screens and the screen size over to get ready to upgrade the original production node. So now both nodes have rejoined the cluster and are stable. And my resources are still running on node Jordan, so now I'm going to stop node Jordan, but in this case I'm going to tell it to move the resource group over to node Jessica. So this is going to do a controlled stop on Jordan and a nice and neat startup on node Jessica. And this is going to take a minute, so I'm just going to advance a little bit in time while this is still running. And while it's still continuing, I'm getting ready to upgrade AIX on node Jordan. So you can see at the bottom here, I'll pause this for just a second, Jessica is stable, it owns the resource group, and node Jordan shows ST-init. So he's left the cluster, and everything is running on node Jessica as we expected. So now we're essentially going to repeat the exact same process we did on node Jessica on node Jordan. The first part being I'm going to upgrade AIX to a CAA capable version. Okay, so let's go ahead. The upgrade is starting to run, so let's pick up where I've now finished the AIX upgrade on node Jordan, and I still need to do the same thing again. I need to install the CAA capable versions file sets of boss.ahafs and boss.cluster. So I'm just waiting for that pick list to join. There we go. I can now search on my two file sets. Choose each one of them and tell it to install. And again, in my environment, this took about a minute for it to install. So I'm going to go ahead and just advance in time a bit while this install is running. And now I've got the OK. So those file sets completed. Now I reboot. After rebooting, I'm going to switch over to the next recording. After I rebooted, I can see that I have upgraded my AIX levels. I have CLcomdey running, and now I need to also modify the etc cluster rhosts on the other node, Jordan. Same thing, only putting the IP addresses of the host names for my cluster nodes. Perform a refresh on CLcomdey. And then I will run CLmakecheck again, but remember, since it's the second time it's been run, I won't get the menu. Now, what's unique in this case of when it's being run is that it actually checks to see if it is the last node in the cluster to be upgraded or not. It knows CLmakecheck has already been run because the CLmakecheck.txt file already exists. It checks the levels of HA installed locally and on every other node in the cluster. And if it is the last node in the cluster to be upgraded, it automatically creates the CAA cluster for you at this point. Now, in my demonstration, this took close to a minute for it to actually create the CAA cluster. So I'm going to skip ahead a few seconds in time to speed this along. Okay, so now it says I can go ahead and upgrade to the latest version of HA. You can look and see that all I'm going to do is check. I'm looking to see if my file systems are mounted. You'll see here at the bottom that there is a new file system called CLrepos_private1. That is a CAA specific file system along with the /aha right above it. So both of those are created when the CAA cluster is created. You'll see that on HDisk 5, which I chose as my repository disk, it gets renamed to CAA Private 0, and it also becomes part of a volume group called CAA VG_private. So you can see what logical volumes get created in CAA VG_private. And the one thing I want to point out here is that we are on 710 of HA and 616 of ClusterAware AIX. And the two mount points of CLrepos private 1 and 2 with the LV names of FSLV 01 and 02, if you start with HA 711 and ClusterAware AIX version 617, that no longer applies. So you will not see those exist anymore. So if you're upgrading to those levels and you don't see that, don't be alarmed. It's perfectly okay. So now I'm okay to perform the upgrade to 7.1 SP4. And once this upgrade starts, I'm going to stop out of this one and switch over to the next one, which is after the upgrade to HA is complete. So let's switch over to the last recording. You can see here that my update to 7.1 SP4 has completed. And now all I need to do is rejoin this node into the cluster and move the resource group back. So on node Jordan, I'm simply restarting cluster services. This will take about a minute or so for it to join. You'll get the OK prompt pretty quick that it says it's OK, but if you're familiar with PowerHA and HACMP, just because you get the OK prompt doesn't mean that it's actually finished. So while this is waiting for, you can see at the bottom down here that node Jordan is joining. So I'm just going to speed up in time a little bit. You can also monitor the hacmp.out file if you choose to do so, but I just like the output of QHA. So now you can see that Jordan has rejoined the cluster. And just like normal, the last thing you see is network down complete. You'll see down here at the bottom that both nodes are stable and in the cluster. Now, the one other thing I wanted to show, which you can see here, I told you before that the disk heartbeat is no longer supported in version 7. And part of the migration completion process is it's going to remove that disk heartbeat network for you. So as soon as I finished joining the cluster, I'm checking the cluster topology and it still shows up. Now I can also tell you all I do is run this command several times and it takes about a minute from the time the migration says it's complete as far as both nodes are in the cluster and running. And after I run this about a dozen times, you will see that HDisk4 and the disk heartbeat no longer exists. So I'm going to run it one more time here. And there you go. You can see that now the disk heartbeat has actually been removed. So I didn't do anything there. All I did was actually just continue to rerun the CLLSIF and wait for it to no longer show up in my topology. So now both nodes have been upgraded. Now all I'm doing here is moving the resource group back to the original primary node. So now I'm just going to hit enter and tell it to move. And you can watch the status down at the bottom when it starts invoking the release. So it's bringing it down on node Jessica and going to bring it up back to node Jordan. This takes close to a minute for it to process. I'm just going to speed along a little bit in time. Now you can see that it says both nodes are now stable. And then if you wait for just a second, you will get the SMIT screen back at the top saying that the RG move has completed. So that is the end of the demonstration. I have successfully upgraded 2 PowerHA 6.1 nodes to version 7.1 using the rolling migration method. As I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at sbodley@us.ibm.com, and thanks for watching.